Hello, and welcome back To Lead is to Learn, the podcast where we explore the dynamic world of leadership together. Whether you're a returning listener or joining us for the first time, I'm truly grateful you've chosen us as your companion upon your leadership development journey. Our mission here is simple: to empower you with the knowledge, skills, and insights needed to excel in leadership. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to welcome each of you, whether this is your first time or you're a regular listener. Each of you are a valued member of our community. Your trust in us is invaluable, and it's a privilege to contribute towards your growth. Speaking of growth, did you know that To Lead is to Learn is brought to you by Lambda Solutions? At Lambda, we specialize in leadership development and coaching, dedicated to empowering individuals like you to become the best leaders possible. If you're ready to elevate your leadership skills, or if your organization is seeking guidance to achieve its leadership goals, I encourage you to explore the Lambda way by visiting our website at www.thelambda.co.uk to learn more about how we can directly assist you. Thank you for being part of our community. Together, let's continue learning and growing. And remember, following and sharing our podcast can help us grow our community and impact even more leaders. In today's special episode, we will be talking to an experienced leader about their experience of leadership, challenges they have faced, and any thoughts and visions for the future.
And I'm sure we're on this planet to be so much more than the work we do. So literally a lack of sleep can contribute to early onset of Alzheimer's. We can't suppress it and push it down because it's killing people. But often the people who pay the most price or the highest price is the people we love the most. Covey talks about standing at your own funeral and the eulogies being read. What do you want people to say about you? I had that moment of literally your life flashing before your eyes. Neuroplasticity means you can change your brain at any age. No two brains are the same. Because, when we look at research, it's the manager that impacts whether or not a person leaves the company. But other times that voice is screaming at you, going, you are more than this, you are meant to be more than this, or you're meant to be doing more than just this.
Without further ado, here's Jeff McKeon, expert in neuroscience, leadership, and management, using the latest in neuroscience to help you lead better, changing the world one brain at a time. So my first question that I have, which I ask everyone who comes onto the podcast, is that everyone has a story behind where they got to and how they got there. Can you share yours very briefly?
Yes, well, my story came from spending 25 years in sales and in the motor industry of all places. But prior to that, selling watches and jewelry is where I actually started. A kid from the country who ended up just having the ability to talk to anyone. So that's where I got a sales role because I could relate to people. And from there, 25 years in the motor industry, but I came up against trying to change leadership from within is really hard in a culture that is at times toxic. So that was where I had to look at my environment and could I change it? And if I couldn't, well, then I needed to go and change me. So that put me on a path of learning and study and a whole different world, but all based around empathetic leadership. And, being more humanistic about leadership models.
So on your LinkedIn profile, you have a very thought-provoking question, which is, have you ever thought about the legacy you are leaving behind? Do you think this is asked by enough people?
No, legacy is often, we talk about what we're going to build or what we're going to make as a legacy. And a piece I wrote earlier today was about, is it your resume virtues or your eulogy virtues? And I'm a book lover, so I always have books beside me like yourself. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I read that in my mid-20s and I wasn't in the space to get it. It didn't work. I was still dealing with a whole pile of stuff, but the one that did work was habit number 2, which is begin with the end in mind. And in that, Covey talks about standing at your own funeral. and the eulogies being read, what do you want people to say about you? And I really internalized that as a human quality. I think it wasn't about what I had, it was about how could I influence people around me. And that's probably been the biggest thing for me when I talk about legacy. And the reason I asked that question is I had a heart attack February in 2019. And I was on my push bike doing a training ride at the time for a charity ride I was due to complete. And I had that moment of literally your life flashing before your eyes. And I asked the questions, will my family be okay? Have I had a good life? And have I left behind a legacy that will be recognized from all those virtues? And I got to say yes, which was a really powerful moment. I don't know if everyone would get to say yes to that. But that moment, it just was so crystallized in my mind that, yes, I've been given this opportunity and I know that I've influenced people in a positive way. I haven't always been perfect. No one's perfect. But it's about that moment of reflection. And I don't wish that upon anyone. There's far better ways to working out whether your legacy is going to have an impact. Don't have a heart attack. I can guarantee it's not the way to do it. Yeah.
Was that when you had that moment, when you had your heart attack and you had that reflection of your life, was it mostly based upon your personal life, or were you reflecting on your work life and everything as well?
100% personal life. I'd read a book a few years earlier than that, not too long ago, but the question was, did I live? Did I love? Did I matter? Brendan Burchard, 6 Habits of Successful People or Highly Successful People. But that, did I live? Did I love? Did I matter? And I got to say yes, because I put those values in alignment. And I think that was probably the most important thing. It wasn't about career. It wasn't about stuff. It was purely about emotional connection with the people that meant the most in my life. And if I ever want to be known for a legacy, it's a legacy of love. You know, what else can you be left with? You know, career is great. Don't get me wrong. Being successful in business is great. I love that feeling. I love that. But that's pretty hollow if you sacrifice your family or those that you love. And often that's the trap, and the balance is we want to get ahead and we want to succeed. But often the people who pay the most price or the highest price is the people we love the most.
That moment in 2019, it seems as if that sort of led to a career change for you.
Yes.
Can you talk us through that?
Yes. So at that stage, I was working in a senior role within Toyota in my department, and I had a team underneath me, and I was paid extremely well. I had all the accolades of success. You know, like I was ranked number 3 in the country in my role, because Toyota measure everything. They're really good at measuring it. So number 1 in the state in Queensland and number 3 nationally. So I was at the highest level you could achieve in my given field. Paid really well, good location to home, good benefits, hated the person I worked for. They created a toxic environment that I was constantly pushing against. And I kept trying to change and trying to be a role model. And I was a senior leader, not a junior employee. I was someone in there actively within their circle of trust trying to have an influence, and it just wasn't working. Anyway, there came a time in late 2019 and I walked in and I said, look, I'm studying emotional regulation. I'd like to help the team with stress regulation, dealing with day-to-day stress, dealing with customer stress, how to breathe, how to put things in perspective, and a couple of skills around that emotional regulation piece. I'd like to be able to do this with our teams, 3 to 5 people. It'll cost nothing, maybe 15 minutes a week, and then do another follow-up call. And I got told, who do you think you are? You're not qualified. If you talk about stress, you're only going to make them stress more. Go back to your office and do what you're paid to do. And that was that moment again. So here within the same year, I'd had 2 moments of complete clarity. And I'll be forever grateful to that leader, my boss. I wouldn't say he was a leader, but he was the boss. His lack of emotional intelligence created the friction. I went, well, if I can't change him, I have to go and change me. Because you think about it, Chris, you're being paid well, the conditions like, close to home, all those things. You go, well, isn't that the ideal? Isn't that what you're supposed to get? Good income, good security, all the accolades, trips, awards, all those things, all the stuff everyone chases. But ultimately working for someone who was disempowering and disengaged is actually a really difficult environment. And so then I sat down with my wife and we just planned an exit strategy. And I needed to ensure that I reached a couple of dates in that. And then COVID came along early 2020 and changed the world. So that was my exit. That was when I left my industry completely and walked away from 25 years of that industry.
I want to go back to something you said in there, which really hits a point for me. You said, I wouldn't call him a leader.
Yes.
Why? What about him would you say, okay, he's not a leader?
He had all the authority, but no compassion for anyone. So he was running a business like he was an accountant, but we are human beings, and with a lack of empathy and a lack of compassion towards not only the people he led in the management team, but then we couldn't get this person to say hello to his staff. Yet they had name badges on. Like just fundamental human being things. He would just walk into his office and ignore them. Like they were desperate. People were desperate for his attention. Wouldn't give it. He would give it to a select group. But it was really about showing that old world thinking of you had to be hard. You had to treat everyone like a commodity that had to be milked. And they get paid. I pay them well enough. They don't need anything more than that. And that's outdated thinking. But because of, that was the world and he'd been given that authority, you couldn't go past that or bypass it because that was being the boss. He was all about the title and you couldn't escalate anything past his rank. It was all about he was in charge. And that was a really disempowering thing to be in when you knew that. So working for Toyota, I had high-level people at Toyota asking my opinion because they respected my opinion, but I couldn't get my own boss to listen to my opinion on things. So I was constantly pushing up against that barrier.
Yeah.
And just that constant lack of emotional connection was why I needed to leave.
So you say your career change is based on the principles of, is it Ikigai?
Ikigai.
Ikigai.
Yeah. So Ikigai is, so it's about getting a balance in life. So the term work-life balance, we hear that all the time, but it's not. It's energy for your life and energy for your work. It's not about a balance, one or the other. If you've got energy in your life, you've got energy for your work. But if your work is draining all your energy, then that impacts your life. And I'm sure we're on this planet to be so much more than the work we do. Even if that work is magnificent, we are still here to be parents, we're to be friends, we're to be, the relatives. Like that's our existence, and find those things that light you up. Because when you find the thing that lights you up, you then get to work even better because you're in a healthy state. And that's where well-being is. It's not about work-life balance. It's about what energy you got and what are you putting into your reserves to allow you to deal with the stress of everyday work, everyday life. And it's about balancing that. It's literally about having an understanding that you have choices. And often we get stuck in those choices and go, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. Well, actually you can, but it requires some form of friction. And that's the part that's uncomfortable. To change, you really have to have some moment, or you are someone who's always looking to change, always looking to grow. And you've got to have that, go back to that balance. If you're going to grow, there's going to be friction because it's uncomfortable.
If someone was in their job right now, they're driving to work, listening to this podcast, how would they know whether or not they are in this balance with their energy then? What would be the telltale signs for them to say, actually, you might want to think about something else?
So there's a great quote. His name's Bill Markham, and it's just such a beautiful quote. culture is the employees' hearts, minds, and stomachs on a Sunday night thinking about Monday morning. And once I read that, I went, oh, that's it. If you enjoy your job, you're not worried about Sunday night. You're going, oh, I get to go and see the people I work with. But if you're in a stressful, horrible job, you're going to go, oh, God, I've got to go to work on Monday. What's that first barrage of emails? Or messages? What is that going to be like on a Monday morning? And then you're stressing on a Sunday night about your job on a Monday. And the other thing that I talk to people a lot is quite often we have, and I know you've had it in your journey, that we have this little voice in our head sometimes telling us, no, there's got to be something different, or we've got to be looking for something else. And sometimes that voice is really quiet, but other times that voice is screaming at you, going, you are more than this, you are meant to be more than this, or you're meant to be doing more than just this. For me, the motor industry I was tired of just selling pieces of metal with no real value. Yes, they're nice and shiny and they're lovely, but what's the meaning behind all of that? It's just greed. It's just we're selling it trying to make as much money as we can. Well, that's not making something. Yes, we talk about transportation and all that, but no, it's just greed. It's just money churn. So everything I do now aligns with, is this congruent with my value structure? And I won't work with anyone who doesn't align with that structure. If they're driven by how much money can we make out of this, that's not what I'm here for, not what I'm interested in.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a crisis at the moment in the work environment where people are trying to find meaning in what they're doing.
Yes.
Are there jobs that people will be doing that are necessary, but maybe the individuals can't find meaning in those jobs?
Yes. And that's where the choice comes in. And like I'm the son of a bricklayer. And my mum said to me, whatever you do, don't pick up a trowel, right? Now, I learned how to lay bricks as a young fella, but it's not something I chose to do. However, if your value structure is in alignment, if you go to work as a bricklayer and your values are you're making a life for your family, you're providing for your wife and children, you're providing a lifestyle because you're working hard, well, then your values are in line and the work doesn't matter. What we find is people go thinking, I've got to find my purpose. Well, your purpose could be as simple as feeding your family. The one thing I like in my origin story, and the one thing that I leave out is my dad was a drunk bricklayer. So that came with a massive amount of drama because of alcohol dependency. So I look at that and go, well, I've provided a lifestyle for my wife and children, and the alcohol hasn't impacted me or them. So that's going, okay, I didn't have that burden, so I could make choices. The work that he did was really hard work, and anyone doing essential work, it's incredibly hard work. I'm married to a nurse. I mean, the work she does, she's an operating nurse. That's staggering attention to detail, and you're on your feet 8-10 hours, whatever the shift is, and it is intense work, literally lives in front of you. That's amazing. But the value, if your values align, you can go and do anything. I can go and dig ditches and mow lawns because my values are pure and I'm doing it to provide a lifestyle for my family. And would I enjoy it every day? No. But would I find joy? Yes, because that's what I'm here to do. I'm here to find joy in no matter what I do because it's a conscious choice. And that's the thing. It's that choice. We have an inbuilt negativity bias. It's there in your brain. You're always going to find negativity. I mean, if you ever want to know what the negativity bias is, watch the first 10 minutes of the news or watch your algorithm on your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed, because nowadays they're pumping poison. So I'm very active on LinkedIn, and the algorithm on LinkedIn will always, if there's a section in there on comments, it says most relevant. Now, I'm all about positivity. I'm all about kindness. But on the relevant, it will always put up the most contentious conversation rather than the one that's nice. It will always put up the one that's got quite often a negative opinion. That's an algorithm. That's that PR of negativity. But our brains are wired to find negativity. The difference is we have the choice. You've been a coach, right? So you're a football coach. I'm a cricket coach. We know that there is always that one kid, that one adult on the field that will go, oh, it's going to be a bad day. And then it's the other one who'll go, oh, what's this going to be like? And you know their performance, regardless of their skill set, will be vastly different. They may have the same amount of skills, but if anything, the one that is looking for positive engagement in the team or hanging around with their mates, they'll actually perform better with a lower level of skills. That's why I love what Ange Postecoglou is doing for Tottenham Hotspur. Brought together, and they're a team. So it's not about this skill set. These are all elite levels, some of the best players in the world, but it's about bringing a team together. And a work environment's no different. It's about bringing the team together, regardless of their skill set, and getting them to believe in what they're doing and trust each other to have those conversations. That's where psychological safety is about high-performing teams. With cricket coaching, for me, I don't need the superstar player. I'd rather have a bunch of players who are there to play for each other than the one or two elite level players, because you would think they lift it up, but you know that they don't actually lift the whole team up. You can get a team of less skilled players, but if they play together and gel together, they'll actually perform far superior because they are a team, not a team of individuals.
Did you know that Lambda Solutions is your gateway to unlocking the secrets of effective leadership, as well as exploring leadership psychology? We not only have this podcast where we explore some of the most topical concepts within leadership and connect you with the wisdom and experience of a community of leaders, we also have a growing treasure trove of leadership wisdom just waiting to be discovered. I would love to invite you to explore the Lambda Library, our very own hub of thought-provoking articles and blogs, carefully crafted to spark your imagination, challenge your thinking, and ignite your leadership potential. The best part? It's completely free, and we are continually looking to update our content to keep you engaged and informed. It's all part of our dynamic journey of learning, and we can't wait for you to join us. Whether you're a budding leader, a seasoned professional, or simply looking to enhance your leadership skills, our content caters to your growth. We would also like to extend our hand. If you have a message to share and would like to submit an article to our library, simply get in touch through the contact form on our website. We would love to add your wisdom to our leadership library. Are you ready to begin your exploration? Simply visit our website at www.thelambda.co.uk and navigate to the Lambda Library. You'll find our growing library of leadership articles waiting for you. You can then add us to your bookmarks to supplement your sources of consistent, high-quality leadership content. Discover insights, uncover strategies, and elevate your leadership game. There's lots in what we've just gone through there. And the first thing I'm going to pick out is you're talking about values alignment for what you're doing.
Yes.
As opposed to necessarily your skill set being right.
Yes.
Do you think when we're getting people ready for work and for careers, we should focus more on values and what therefore aligning a job with your values rather than skills? Okay, what are you skilled for?
It's a balance of both. But a conversation the other day, my son's about to finish year 12. He's coming over to England next year to play cricket up in York somewhere. With details are yet to be finalised, but that's where it looks like he's going to be. And we know that he's our communicator. So he got voted class valedictorian because he's the connector. His social skills and his communication skills are really superior. My daughter is in year 10. She's the pure academic. So each person has a different skill set. And I listened to a conversation the other day. One of the year 12 students asked my daughter, who's in year 10, and said, what does your plan look like at the moment? And it was like, oh my God, there's emotional intelligence in a 17-year-old asking someone who's 15, well, what does your plan look like now for your post years of school? What's your career path look like? But knowing that it can change, knowing that if you find that thing you're truly passionate about in regards to learning, you may get into uni and change course completely. It's that thing about it, and I'm really conscious of it. Stop asking teenagers what they want to do with their lives. Quite often, adults don't know yet. My daughter she's interested in psychology and pursuing a study in psychology. She went to our local university for an open day. The professor of psychology was there, gave this most wonderful talk. He said, I failed year 11 math. He said, don't listen to your teachers when they say you've got to do this. What you need to do is get into uni and find the thing you're passionate about and then follow that course of study. So he did psychology and found that he loved the neuroscience side of psychology. So my daughter went, oh my God, I'd love that. So we know that that's the plan at the moment, but that may change once they get into uni. What we find, though, is a lot of children entering the workforce. Everyone's trying to be pigeonholed. We understand that. But there's also a lot of family expectations on what you should do. I think that's an unfair judgment. That's where a lot of the pressure comes, and no wonder why there's a generation who are lost. They've had their parents telling them or putting that expectation on what you should do to succeed. And then they look at their parents going, well, why aren't you doing that? Oh, I hate my job. Well, understand that, but you're telling us that we should do this, and that's where you've got to follow something that is your skill set. And if you can find the intersect with your passion, well, then that's where you enjoy it. But knowing that any job is still going to have things you don't like. There are certain things I do in my job I don't like, but I know they're necessarily to achieve the end goal of what I do like and the curiosity of learning and studying. So there are certain things I have to force through and chunk down and just treat them as laying bricks and laying the foundations, because then I get to go and do the stuff I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, and I think when we come to leaders, you mentioned about Ange Postecoglou and bringing people together, and it's a new approach to leadership that's sort of starting to trickle out into the world, I would say, of looking at the individuals and bringing individuals together.
Yes.
What does effective leadership look like for you?
The best way for effective leadership is to make sure that you're hearing the people at all levels in your business. Often you will have a level that they're just talking to the senior leadership team, but they're not talking to the people on the ground doing the work. They're not talking to the people in the factory making the stuff. They're not going through that process of having conversations with everyone within the organization. There are certain organizations that are really effective and wonderful leaders who go to the shop floor and have a conversation, as opposed to are completely removed from the workers. Like, that's not healthy for an organization. It isn't, yes, you have to make decisions. So they say, well, distance yourself, but then you're missing out on all the valuable insights and intel from your team, but also inspiring your team to want to do better at that ground level. Who doesn't want to hear the boss walk into the office and say hello? Imagine the boss walking into the office saying hello. G'day, Chris, how was your weekend? Like, if that's a C-level executive who's done that just as a walk past once, like, that's a great moment. That's how you motivate people. You see them. And using what Ange said the other day, he talked about how these are elite level athletes. They're paid a huge amount of money, but ultimately they still have the same struggles and the same problems and dramas of life. They're not immune to that. They still hurt. They still feel like we do. They still have human suffering. It's just they're really, really good at what they do, and they're in the spotlight. So I think as a leader, the more we use our heart and our head, you've got to have the combination. Yes, you have to be a businessman or businesswoman who makes really difficult decisions. But if you're just making them clinically without any empathy or any of your heart, well, then pretty soon you'll be looking for staff, and you'll be wondering why your staff turnover number is really high.
I guess that's the emotional intelligence part of it, using your heart and your head.
And we talk about, there's a number of people that reference it. And Adam Grant's latest book, he talks about the term soft skills. And soft skills and hard skills actually came from teaching people how to operate tanks. There was the hard skills of firing and the operation of the tank, and there was the soft skills of the people inside and doing that. People took that as, soft skills, use that emotional intelligence stuff. No, it's actually really hard. And it takes a conscious effort, but it can be learnt, which means it can be taught. We're now seeing emotional language being taught to school kids. And people say, they're all about feelings and this, that, and the other. No, they actually have the emotional language to be able to express what they're feeling. And our generation's probably missed out on all of that completely. So here we have a bunch of the next generation of workers who have a dictionary of emotional labeling. And we have happy, angry, or sad,
I guess that's going to introduce a whole new realm of challenges into the workplace within the next 5-10 years.
Yes. And that's where you have to upskill yourself. And it is a skill, like I keep going back to, it's a teachable skill that you have to have the ability to be able to learn emotional intelligence and then display it as an active leadership model every single day. And the term unicorn business, they talk about $1 billion startup and they refer to it as a unicorn. No, a unicorn business should be referred to those ones that have dynamic leadership, empathy-first leadership, who are demonstrating psychological safety, and those businesses are absolutely thriving. When you walk into a business that's got it right, because everyone gets it, everyone feels good. There's this energy and this vibe in the business. And you go, what are they doing here? Because this is extraordinary. And that's because they have top-down empathetic leadership. One of the things we say at Neurocapabilities, it's not about free lunches and bean bags. It's so much more than that. You can give people the free stuff and that'll placate them for a little while. But if they're not being led or not being seen as individuals, those things they get tired really quickly.
Your work with neurocapability, then, I want us to come on to this. It's about sort of combining, you say, the neuroscience and leadership.
Yes.
Can you explain what that actually means to our listeners?
Well, the easiest way to look at it is there's two fields of work. There's leadership and there's neuroscience. The best way to describe what we teach is, on the airplane, when they talk about you've got to put your oxygen mask first on to then look after children or whoever else you're caring for. So this side of it, so using the neuroscience of self-regulation, so we get deeper into, you have to understand what's happening in your own brain and your own body. When you understand that, you can then lead other people effectively. So most of us never receive training on our brain and our fight, flight, and freeze response. And it's programmed in there. And we don't talk about it. We do now because the science has come out. And if we look at neuroscience as a science, mathematics, other sciences like that have been around for hundreds of years. Neuroscience really came about in 1996. They started doing functional MRIs. So that's when they first got to see real live imaging of what was going on in our brain. And you think about that, that's technology that's only about 30 years old. So that's the first snapshots on what was actually happening. And the courses that we teach and the leadership models we deliver is all about how do you regulate yourself to then effectively lead others, to then create psychological safety and high performance. So it's like a step-by-step process to build up your working skills and using the science as that base. And my job is pretty much to translate the science into everyday language. So if I can take the research papers, which are quite heavy reading, you've got to Google a lot, and that's every line. You have to get the reference and understand what the footnote's about and what they're talking about. and then translate that into something that you and I can talk about. And I guess the best way to describe the fight, flight, and freeze is that's happening every interaction you have with a person or every situation throughout the day. And if you don't know that, it's just going to happen automatically because that's what it's programmed to do in your brain. You know, it kept us alive and it keeps us alive, but we don't have to have a fight, flight, or freeze reaction to every email or text message. But quite often we do.
A friend of mine did a TED talk the other day, actually, and it was about the idea that we have caveman brains, but we're living in a sort of very modern world.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
And our brains, I guess, they've developed for, millions of years to live out in the wild.
Yes.
And then we've thrust them into a world where that knock next door doesn't necessarily mean we have to run that way or suddenly fight it. Yeah.
And that's where in a workplace, if you don't understand that you're standing over a person, pointing at them, telling them what to do, is creating a fight, flight, or freeze response, how can you lead that person effectively? If you don't know that that's what you're doing to them just in that leadership moment. I mean, it might be straightforward. Hey, Barry, you've got to go and do this, and I need you to do it right now. But, you don't know what's going on in that person. And so they might find that really challenging because whatever's happened in their life. And the one thing we talk about is no two brains are the same. The neurological wiring of our brain is 100% unique. Everyone's different. So what upsets me may not upset you at all. Like, we're totally different people. So you have to have some understanding of that to try and find a balance. You can't personalize everything, but you can certainly have an understanding of, in general, this is where we're going to tick the boxes and make sure I don't upset my people by what I'm saying to them. And it's using that language of emotional regulation first. So the best way to describe it is if you can understand your high-pressure cooker situation and keep that under control, you're not going to let that happen on anyone else in your team. But sadly, what happens is within most organizations, the person who's really good at a job gets promoted to a manager without any management training. Suddenly, they're thrust into looking after the team because they know what to do, but they don't know how to lead. There was a statistic that a lot of management training doesn't happen until a person's in their 40s. But they may well have been leading teams for 10 years. They just had no formalized training. So if I was talking to any C-suite or any large organization, we'd be talking about mid-level management training because that's where you get the most value. The interesting thing is though we don't talk to C-suites who aren't engaged because unless it comes from the top down, it will never work.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between the old school and outdated methodology and humanistic leadership. If you've got a board that is still in that old cutthroat world, they're never going to bring on board what we do because it's questioning everything about their leadership style. So we only ever work with organizations who want to change and are actively in that process of changing.
You mentioned about leadership and management there in terms of management training, but then management and leadership are very different practices. What's your understanding of what makes management and what makes leadership?
Well, if you look at the definition of the two words, and they're two very specific words, they intersect a lot. Leadership is steering the ship in the right direction, and management is making sure the sails are hoisted in the right direction. The difference is though, what we seem to think is that they're two separate things, but they really have to follow in line. So if you've got really bad leadership, but a good manager, well, they can actually make an impact for a while, but it runs out of energy. If you have aligned management from aligned leadership all the way through, the performance is so much higher because everyone's working in the same direction. And that's that big thing. You still have to measure KPIs. You still have to get efficiencies. You still can find value in all of that. It's still got to be there. You've got to know the numbers. That's the one thing that I talk to organizations about. You still have to track every number. Don't ever stop looking at the numbers, but the numbers are the byproduct of what you do in your leadership and your daily management. You still have to have a reporting mechanism, but just remember that the reporting mechanism is history. The leadership is creating direction. So management and leadership still got to look at the numbers and see where they went, but leadership has to point it all in the right direction. I think that's the important thing. We sometimes think leadership is about looking at the numbers and making decisions. Well, leadership is setting the course that everyone else follows from. It really is.
Yeah.
So yeah, head and heart. It's very much about a balance of both.
I describe it as being leadership as the why we're doing things, why we're doing the particular thing that we set out to do.
Yes.
Whereas management is the how, the what, the where, the when, the who. It's the measurables, if you like. The measurables are the management side of things, but the direction and the reason we're doing something is the leadership.
Yes. And sometimes people can get caught up in management. They can get caught up in just purely following the numbers, looking at the numbers, because that's what they're paid to do. They're paid to measure the numbers and see how they're doing. But ultimately, and that's where from the neuroscience of leadership is if you understand how people react to that stress, you can modify your behavior to lead even as a manager in a better way. You know, some of the stuff that with my teams was always about how do I make them feel safe enough to tell me that they don't like something? Because ultimately that's the measure. If you have people who don't want to tell you that something's wrong, well, you have no trust. And if you have no trust, how can you ever achieve high performance? You know, and I think that's the missing piece.
Yeah. And it's leading the whole person, really, isn't it?
Yes. And it's very much about if you can allow them to create their drive. So going back to when we were talking about their passion and their drive in crafting a job. So there's a thing called the Harvard profit chain. It was 2006, 2014. It's been around for a long time, but it's only now we're starting to get traction on it. If you create the right job environment, you look after your people, you create the space they need to do the work they do, you have a higher productivity and output, you have more engaged customers. When you have more engaged customers, you have higher net promoter score or customer satisfaction. Ultimately, you make more money and you have better turnover and profit. What most companies look at is, we want higher turnover and better profit, and everything else is a byproduct. The companies that get it right, they focus on their people and their customers, and their byproduct is just exponentially bigger than if you were just managing the numbers. You know, I look at it with the team I managed before I left, and I had a metric that was looking after the people. It was all about focusing on the team because my boss said to me, I want 10% year-on-year improvement. In 6 years, I grew my team's performance 200% in turnover. So we went from an organization of 35 million to 70 million. So if I'd done what he'd done, I'd gone 10% year-on-year. Would have been nowhere near it. So we had this exponential growth because I focused on the people, and the people create the output that you're chasing. But if you foster the right environment, they do so much more than your expectation. And that's that Harvard profit chain. You look after the people. And Simon Sinek, that's what it says. Same with Richard Branson. If you look after the people, they look after your customers, and your customers look after your profit. You know, you get that right and it just flows, and that company will thrive and becomes, everyone wants to work there. Everyone wants to be a part of it because they know there's that energy and it's thriving.
That's that idea that a lot of businesses put the leadership development as in part of the overheads, and it's one of the first things to get cut if you're trying to save.
Yeah. Which, once again, from a metric point of view, you're managing the numbers. That's what an MBA would tell you to do. That's what a business analyst would tell you to do. But we now know, particularly from a neuroscience point of view, is if you create psychologically safe teams in your workplace, you will get higher performance than you would anticipate. It's that simple. Look after the people doing the work, they produce more than you anticipate.
If we were talking to a business right now, then if they're listening, someone in charge of the business, someone in charge of that, how long would you say that they should expect to wait after investing in leadership development? How long should they expect to wait to see the outcome of that in terms of the profitability? Because at the end of the day, they're looking at the bottom line and they have to.
Yes. And they always look at return on investment because that's their world. They're looking at their spend and what their budget is. And sometimes budgetary constraints mean there is no money for it. There's actually a measurement tool developed with PricewaterhouseCoopers and a company here in Australia that specialises in mental health spend. And they could predict the return on investment on mental health spend, so well-being programs, at an average across all industries of 2.3 within 12 months. So every dollar you spent, there would be a $2.3 return within 12 months. It got even bigger. So this tool, if you went into industries, heavy industries, mining, construction, it was even higher. And they're talking a return on investment of 10 to 15. So every dollar you spent, you would get a $10 to $15 return on it because it's something they're crying out for in those industries because they don't have that safety net. They don't have that psychological safety. So leadership training is about empowering everyone within your organization to be able to do better because ultimately the byproduct is everyone in the business benefits. All the workers, because, you know, when we look at research, it's the manager that impacts whether or not a person leaves the company. Very rarely is it the C-suite. No, it's normally the direct line manager or one or two above. In my case, it was two above. It wasn't the bosses, the big bosses, it was two up. That next level of boss impacted whether or not I stayed there. So the manager is around 70% of the influence on the well-being of the employee. So where's the money going onto management training? Because if you're turning over staff at a high rate, you've got to look at your manager. They're the people talking to your staff every day of the week.
And staff turnover is one of the biggest costs that organizations have because you have to first put the advert out to find the people. You then have to take them on board. You've got to train them internally to do the role. And it's just that cost. You can save that cost just by not losing that person.
Yeah. And it's also the cost of the intellectual property of getting rid of an experienced person who disengaged at work because you weren't listening to them. You know, what they know instinctively and what they have learned. There's always that one person in the company, and you'll have known it, Chris, there's always that person you go to, and they will be able to tell you, oh, yeah, talk to this person. They'll know exactly about that. That person is usually never paid anywhere near their worth because when that person leaves a company, everyone walks around going, oh, I don't know, Jenny used to know how to do that. No one realizes that there's that connector, that one person in the organization that just gets stuff done because they know the network, you know. And I bet you that person's never paid anywhere near what they're worth to an organization. And most companies wouldn't know until they've gone.
Yeah. And more often than not, that's the most influential person at that organization, which effectively, if you're looking at it in a real measure, they're the real leader.
Yes.
They're the person that everyone goes to get something done.
Yeah. And leadership can happen at any level. You don't have to have a title. Business cards with a title on it is still a lot to do with ego. A leader can be at any level in any organization. And some of the greatest leadership demonstration is within sporting clubs. The volunteers and the people who turn up, they just love their teams so much. You think about it. They turn up, they volunteer, they'll do anything you ask. They'll already have thought of it anyway. They'll do all this extra stuff that no one will ever give them credit for because they're involved passionately with that club. Imagine if we had all our workers like that, or even a larger portion. Like I looked at some statistics here in Australia, and there's 20% of Australian workers are actively engaged, which is actually a good measure. But what that means is 4 out of 5, so 80% aren't engaged. That's our entire workforce. 4 out of 5 people just, oh, yeah, I'm at work. Imagine if you lifted that to 30 or 40%.
Yeah.
Like worldwide, it's only 23% of workers are engaged. You know, so we're still, that's 77% of workers are just turning up. What a terrible indictment on our work society. But that's the pushback that's happened because of the pandemic. So the pandemic was just the catalyst for change.
Yeah.
The reason the change had to happen was the underlying structure was flawed. Because we'd gone through the 90s of greed, and Gordon Gekko, greed is good, and Wall Street, and everything about corporate excess. And the pandemic came along and people just went, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So now you'll see this change of organizational structure and people talking actively about emotional well-being, mental health, emotional intelligence in the workplace, because the next generation of kids are coming with it. Got the language, whereas we don't.
I was going to ask you a little bit later on, but I'll ask you it now because it ties in perfectly with what you said. We talked about that sort of hang up from the 90s, the 80s, 90s, that chasing the paycheck. And I think we have this sort of hangover in a sense that's sort of just starting to be sort of highlighted. And I've labeled them as sort of passive aggressive work hours. That's that person looking at the person next to them. It's like, why are they clocking out now?
Yes.
Or how late did that person just get in? It's that I have to work for a long period of time.
Yes.
And then the other side of things as well is this sort of wearing stress as a badge of honor, almost walking around the office going, oh, I'm so stressed. I've got so much work to do. Sort of like just parading it.
Yes.
What are your takes on those two things?
Well, I come from a place where that was my world, right? So I wore my lack of sleep as a badge of honor. I wore how much I could do more than anyone else as a badge of honor. And I used to clock watch. And there were a couple of things that changed real key on that. One, I started reading a lot, and you realize that your lack of sleep is just going to kill you ultimately, and it impairs your cognitive ability. Research shows that there's two things going on. Once you get to a certain point of sleep deprivation, like 14 hours, it's almost like you drink driving. So your decision-making is impaired. But the other thing is when you go to sleep, your brain washes itself. It's quite an amazing function. And it cleans out, they're called beta amyloid plaques, which are in your brain, which are early markers for Alzheimer's disease. So literally a lack of sleep can contribute to early onset of Alzheimer's. Like when you read that research, you go, I'm getting 7 or 8 hours sleep a night now. Whereas I used to be, I can work crazy amount of nights and, work hard because look at me go. So people wore that badge of honor. I wrote a piece the other day, and it was that a healthy organization with strong leadership will look at the clock and celebrate you leaving because they know you've got a life outside work. A poor environment or a toxic environment with poor leadership will look at you leaving and shame you for it. And that's that time where, why are you going now? And it's corporate greed, and people have had enough. And that's that massive pushback. The pandemic was a pushback. It was a reset. And that happens through history. We have these massive resets, and they'll keep going. There'll be something else. We talk about the dot-com boom, and then we talk about Wall Street crashes, and now we've had the pandemic. There'll be something in another 5 or 7 years. But this has been a massive reset of work and that relationship to work. And it's questioned a lot of leadership models, and people have said, no, we've had enough. We're pushing back. And so, there's the new terms of quiet quitting, and that's been around for ages. We just came out with a new term for it. But it's a pushback against leadership styles to say, no, enough's enough. And the other thing that I witnessed is a massive change against the American idea of how superior America is when it comes to business. And they're so good at highlighting. But you're in the UK, I'm in Australia. No matter how much you complain about the NHS and we complain about our healthcare system, it's free. We have maternity leave, we have holidays. There are people in America who get no maternity leave, no holiday. Like, what sort of culture is that? What that means is the elite are taking advantage of the workers, and that's that imbalance that's being rewritten because of COVID, because of the pandemic.
Sticking on the healthcare sort of track here.
Yes.
So we talked about, sleep and the importance of sleep and the long working hours being a negative thing within the office. Yet one of the things that we have is I don't know if it happens over there, but it happens here. We have doctors and nurses pulling 12, 13, 14 hours
yes.
on a regular basis. That's fundamental to us because, society can only work because we have a healthy society, because people can actually work because they're healthy to do so. But then we have the people who are looking after everyone are depriving themselves of sleep.
Yes.
What can we do if we were in an ideal world, rose-tinted glasses on here, what could we do to the healthcare profession if we were in charge and we were the leaders to help that be a healthier environment, to set an example for the rest of the world that they're serving?
So I'll give two examples of that. And one is right now happening in Australia, and there's a court case going on about junior doctors pushing back against unregulated and overwork hours, because they're literally said, first and foremost, you're not paying us because you say we're on call and all of these terms, and it's a given that your peers did that, so you should do that. But secondly, they're saying we're making poor decisions and it's killing people. And here's the science that says we know that we need our sleep. So there's actually a pushback happening where they're saying, no, enough is enough. That'll take a generation to go, because as the older doctors literally die out or leave the organization, we'll have another generation of going, look, we're prepared to work, but these are the hours we're going to work. And that will be a massive cultural change. The other thing that I think the biggest push we need to see is any hospital service has to see nursing staff as critical and vital to the well-being of the entire organization. And being married to a nurse, sadly, that's not the case. It's some organizations, like if you treated staff like they did nursing staff, everyone would be sued. But it's like a given, oh, well, that's what they do. And because nurses are givers, they're carers, you don't go into the nursing profession to make money. You go in because you want to care for people and look after people. And so the business has taken advantage of them. But I think that's a cultural change that's happening, because if doctors are pushing back and saying, no, enough's enough, that'll flow through to the nurses, where the nurses said, okay, well, we're not going to do it either, But yeah, it's wrong, because the science says you pretty much got doctors making decisions while they're drunk. Like on a mine site here in Australia, I don't know if the UK, they test them for alcohol and they test them for drugs. You can't go down a mine if you haven't had enough sleep. There's regulated sleep periods, even down to the fact that on some mine sites, they do warm-up exercises before they go on site. And they have commitments to workers. So the commitment to a worker is, I'll look after you, so I'll make sure you get home to your family. Will you do the same for me? So this is part of their pre-start before they go underground. So there's some of this amazing stuff we're seeing, but there's these pockets of industries where that's still being an old school mentality. We'll see it change. It's like all things, like it either comes as a catalyst, like COVID, like the pandemic. The pandemic changed a lot of businesses. Sadly, it put too much pressure on the healthcare system. But given time and space and recovery, I think it will change as well. There'll be pushback. Yeah.
And I think in some cases, particularly, let's say, on the healthcare service, they might be saying, oh, well, there's a shortage of people, so we need you to work these long hours.
Yes.
But it's almost that thing of, it's between a rock and a hard place. Which one do you actually change? If you change the culture and the way it is, maybe you'd attract this new generation of people coming in that's looking at it going, I don't want to work in that sort of environment. And I think that's something that needs to happen, particularly in the public sector, because I think the public sector is a slower moving beast than the corporate sector, where things will just change very quickly.
Yes. But I think we'll come through with the next generation of workers. They'll rewrite the rules. And then there'll become a crisis of, well, we can't get enough people. And someone will say, that's because your conditions don't match what people want or expect. So you have to change your conditions to attract the workers. It's no longer a sacred thing. Going back a generation, people would go to work, they'd work in the same organization for 40 years, and they'd get the gold watch and they'd retire. Well, that model has gone completely because corporate greed said, well, we need to hit our targets, so you lot are dispensable, so get rid of them. That changed. So that was the excess of the 80s and the 90s. So now, it's 2023. So there's another change happening, and it will continue. Business will always evolve. It will always change. We have a connected world. It's digitally connected. It will call out the bullshit now far quicker. There are negatives with the world we live in, a digital deluge and an overwhelm. However, there are also some really strong things. It will call out, no, this behavior is no longer acceptable. And so once someone starts on that going, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And they go, the crisis is they can't attract new workers. Well, there's your answer. Change your conditions. You might just attract the next generation of workers.
Unlock your leadership potential with personalized one-to-one coaching from Lambda Solutions. Take the first step to empowering yourself to overcome any challenges and lead your team to new heights. Our coaching services provide consistent support tailored to your goals and challenges, guiding you through the uncertainty and leading to growth. But that's not all we offer. Our consultancy services extend beyond coaching, encompassing a comprehensive approach to leadership development. Explore our bespoke consultancy packages, which include coaching as a fundamental component. Or if you're seeking something even more tailored, contact us directly through our website to build a solution perfectly suited to your organization's needs. Visit www.thelambda.co.uk to discover how Lambda Solutions can help you to reach your leadership potential. Together, let's learn, grow, and elevate your organization to a new level of success. I think one of the things that is really prevalent now is there's this idea that the way we are working, the way we have been working isn't working. And I think one of the big things, it links to sleep in a sense that we spend 8 hours a day at work. We are supposed to sleep for 8 hours. That leaves 8 hours for the commute, for feeding yourself, for going to the gym. Only a third of your day can you actually spend doing what you want to do and the things that most of the time are more valuable to you as an individual.
Yes.
Do you think the world is shifting in a way that maybe we might have more time to ourselves and sort of less time spent working, because long has gone the time that 8 hours is what you need to do, when actually you could probably do that same amount in about 5 hours if you really focused and it was a digital environment like we are here?
Yeah, so there's going to be some people that will benefit. There'll be still some things that take X amount of hours to do regardless. So there's going to be contributions for some form of manual work that has to, no matter what you can do, you can't make that quicker. But there are going to be people that will benefit from a digital world. I'm one of those. I can do my work in a shorter period of time. And proficiency is not about the number of hours you spend at the desk. And particularly with the writing I do, it's about getting into a flow state and how quick I can get into that flow state and what's my output during that period. My output can be extremely high during a 2-hour window, but you've got to get into that window of achieving that level. And so there are going to be people that can benefit and work in an environment that your laptop is your office and you can do that anywhere. Not everyone's going to have that luxury, but that then becomes the newer haves and the have-nots. There are going to be some people who can live in a digital world who will have those benefits, but they come at costs as well. There are certain things that they don't have. So if people are in a digital world, you quite often have diminished one-on-one human contact. Now, for the introverts, some introverts say, well, I don't need people, but ultimately they still need connection. For an extrovert, and I'm an extrovert, I need people. So I balance it. I have in office and I have work from home, because for me, I know that works best. That's a luxury and a flexibility that has changed the world, since the pandemic, but even before that, it was changing. So That's just rapidly changed that. And that will be the new currency, I guess, is the luxury of your own time and being able to do what you want.
Yeah. And I think when we first went into COVID and the bit straight after COVID, almost organizations tried to impose the old way of working, that clocking in, clocking out on people. They'd be like on your laptop, they'd track your mouse movements. And it's very old school way of doing things, because they're forgetting that within the office, you're going to have the 2-minute chat with them, going to get a coffee, cigarette break outside, those sorts of things.
Yes.
That wasn't happening at home.
Yeah. And it was key trackers and mouse trackers and all of that technology really showed that organization did not trust their staff. And those organizations suffered a terrible price because they wondered why they couldn't attract staff. Because if that's in your job description, oh, by the way, we use key trackers, people would go, well, I'm not working for you. Thanks. See ya. That was the next shift. So immediately they went to those, they didn't trust their employees. But then the next generation, when those employees left, the new people they're trying to employ just wouldn't turn up, because why would you? There were choices now. And that's that evolution. So human beings are amazing at adapting. One of the things I touched on earlier, and it's really interesting, is that we have that inbuilt negativity bias. And there are some people who will always find what's wrong and always stay in that. But you can train your mind to look for what is positive. And it really is a learnable skill. We just don't teach it to enough people. But it starts from being grateful for something. So we go back to the beginning of my conversation. People ask me, you're always happy. Yeah, but I learnt the value of being grateful for my heart beating. I'll never recommend it to anyone, but my God, doesn't it change your life? Because when you're grateful, like this weekend, I'm doing a triathlon at the age of 53. I'm just grateful that I get to go and do that. Like what a great thing to do. I've lost friends, family members, they're no longer with us. So that choice of being grateful for something allows you to find more positive things to look for, because you're training your brain to look for the positive. So that's that negativity bias. It's there for a reason. It's there to stop you standing in front of a train. It's there to stop you getting hit by something or some bad interaction or situation. It's designed to keep you alive. But we live in a world that's not designed for that. So, of course, you don't need it always on. It doesn't need to be primed. And if you watch the news, the first 10 minutes of the news, it's guaranteed to make you have a worse day. So if you start the day being grateful, grateful you're here, grateful that you got to go for a walk in the morning, grateful for your coffee, grateful for whatever it happens to be, even if you just do a couple of things like that in the morning, you're priming your brain during the day to look for something more positive rather than the default negative. If we can teach that to people in the world, you'll realize there's actually a lot of good stuff.
I think you pointed out earlier as well that it's a choice, because naturally we'll go to that negative.
Yes.
But we kind of need people to understand that actually to be more positive, it does take work, it does take effort, and it is a choice. You have to go, okay, I'm going to ignore that. I'm going to instead focus on that. And I think people need to realize it's not necessarily going to be easy to suddenly switch.
No, and it can be trained. So there's science behind why and the power of gratitude, and the science and the research is there. There's a great quote by Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And it's a wonderful story, Auschwitz survivor. But he talks about we have the choice, and it's between stimulus and response. There's a space, and in that space lies your power to choose. And when you understand that, I have a choice to react to anything. My brain is still going to keep me safe from walking in front of a car because that's built into my brain. But everything else, I choose positivity, I choose kindness, because I've learnt the power of my choice. And that's a daily practice. That's something I'm here to do. And, I go for a walk in the morning and or I get on my bike or whatever I do. It doesn't matter what I do. It is a choice to be grateful for that opportunity. If I go back to it, if you watch the news first thing in the morning, or you pick your phone up first thing in the morning, you are usually priming your brain for the negativity bias. And we want to teach more people that's what's making us feel worse during the day is we're priming our brain with the wrong thing.
If we were to go into an organization now, let's say we were going to be going in and we're going to work with their leaders and we're going to try and change the culture. We're going to try and make it a more positive culture. We're going to try and make it a more inclusive and people-centered culture. What would you start your training with the leaders? You said you would focus on the middle leaders. What would you start working with them about?
The first thing to teach anyone is that no two brains are alike. That's the first thing. But each brain can change. So neuroplasticity means we can change our brains and change the wiring of our brains. And a lot of people get told, and I'm sure you've heard the term, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But it's a limiting belief. You can, it just takes a little bit more work because as you age, your ability to change becomes a little harder. But even understanding that you can change is the thing that we educate with and we start with, is that you have to get curious about your own brain to understand what's going on in someone else's. How many people spend their time wondering why someone doesn't do it the way I do it? Right? Why don't you do it? You've been a coach. You've been a football coach. I'm an avid fan. Why don't they just do it this way that I told them to do it? Well, that's because they're not you. Their brain's not you. They can't possibly replicate what you do or say. They'll do their own version of it. The other thing with teaching managers and mid-level managers is the value and their value to the organization. And quite often that's missed. They're not made to feel like they are making this massive change. But when you empower them, that they've got this team that they can build and grow and allow them to thrive, that makes them feel energized to come to work. But the first thing we teach about is your fight, flight, and freeze reaction. If you don't understand that, you won't understand your people. We teach it, and it's really easy on a visual, and I'll show you, but it's the thumb model. So we have the amygdala, which is the middle of your brain, and then you have the bit over the top, which is your prefrontal cortex, where you do all your thinking. So that little bit operates your fight, flight, or freeze. That's it. When you fight, flight, or freeze, it flips your lid and you stop thinking. So that's why when people get into an argument, they stop thinking rationally because the amygdala, the fight, flight, and freeze center, has actually been triggered and it's doing its job, which is to stop wasting time on thinking and save your life. And once you understand that, you realize, oh my God, I just had an argument with the person in the queue for the coffee shop. Why? Well, I flipped my lid and they were upset. I was upset and it doesn't make sense. So that's the thing. When we say it doesn't make sense, it's because no one explains it to us to understand that that is our underlying anatomy and we've all got exactly the same thing going on in a brain.
There's a book, I actually have it up here, by Professor Stephen Peters, which is all about the monkey brain.
Yes. So even just using the monkey brain is a perfect understanding. Are you being led by the monkey or your board of directors?
Yeah.
Right? And keeping the animal analogy before, automatic negative thoughts, ants. So that's your negativity bias. So ants, automatic negative thoughts, they're programmed into our brain. They're there permanently. And you'll notice the language I try and stay away from. The biggest word I used was amygdala and prefrontal cortex. So when we get into our courses, we'll go really deep to give you the language, but it's about translating that into everyday language. Got to have the science, because there's always the skeptics or there's always the doubters. So you've got to have the science to back up what you're talking about. And that's where we give people everyday language to teach this to their teams and empower their teams to teach it. And that's where we look at, if I can teach it to one person and then that person teaches it to their family, now that's a ripple of change, because then they're teaching emotional regulation to their own family. And so that spreads from their own family, all because they had a good manager who taught them emotional regulation, who then they went home and said, hey, I've been learning this stuff at work. I think we would all benefit from this. Get a load of this.
Yeah.
So that's why we have videos that start out as really small, short things. And then you build up that, the full course is an 18-month course. So it's getting people at whatever level they're at. But we'll go into an organization, and we normally spend a lot of time in organizations in that mid-level managers, because they're the ones who have the most impact through the teams. We do have stuff for the individuals in the team, but it's the mid-level management that's where the real change happens in an organization.
When it comes to your fight, flight, or freeze response and things that happen, let's take the example you used there of, blowing off at someone in the coffee shop in the queue.
Yes.
So more often than not, the trigger that causes that is something that's sort of like a ghost left over from someone's childhood and the way they've been upbringing. So
yes,
an element of what you're going to be going into organizations and doing and teaching and, focusing with those individuals is going to be an element of counseling, in a sense of helping them understand maybe something that comes from the past.
Yes.
What do you do? Because that can really open up a massive can of worms for some people. What happens if suddenly that top's gone and then suddenly that individual is in a moment of crisis? Do you have things in place for that?
Look, in any level, it's about connecting the interventions that are required. So we're not a professional mental health service. However, we know people that we could instantly say, okay, you need to do this. We need to take you out. We need to create a safe environment for you. We need to step you out, and we need to put you in contact with people who are specialized in this field. And that's happened, and it will always continue to happen, because that's human nature. Human beings, we're all different, but we have these similar patterns that can be identified. So when you understand the patterns, and you'll know the person, there'll be that one person, if you're presenting to a room of people, there'll be that one person with their arms crossed, shaking their head. And they're usually muttering to themselves and swearing. Now, they're not necessarily upset at what you've said, but something you've said has upset them based on their history and on that patterning of their brain. And just keep in mind that a lot of that happens in their early childhood. So there's a thing called ACE, Adverse Childhood Experience Score, and that measures those big trauma and little trauma in your childhood, maps your brain, because that's when you learn right, wrong, love, connection, all of those things at a very early age as your brain is forming. And so the Adverse Childhood Experience Score helps people to understand what they experienced in their childhood, which then maps the person as an adult. The great thing is it can change. Neuroplasticity means you can change your brain at any age. The great thing we have now with technology is that there are apps that are teaching people with Alzheimer's how to get better at playing games which helps their brain. 70 or 80-year-old people playing on iPads because it helps their brains rewire and still allows their neuroplasticity. So we can make those changes. No matter what's happened in someone's history, we can still make those changes. Then we get into the next level, that we know that epigenetics, so that we know that things that are happening to us are changing our genes and changing the DNA structure. So when we understand that, we can then do things to prevent or correct that. So this is where it gets really exciting about what we're learning and what neuroscience keeps unlocking all the time.
In a sense, it's what's happening in the brain and what we're experiencing in the world can impact on our body, and our body can then impact on our brain and the way and it's just a continuous cycle.
Yeah. The one thing we teach, and I teach it to everyone, but a great piece of research, Professor Andrew Huberman on the Huberman Lab, and he talks about the double inhale and the large physiological sigh. Any stress regulation process, it's the simplest and quickest way, which is double inhale through your nose and then a big exaggerated physiological sigh, because that's exactly what you do when you stop crying. Watch any child cry. Right? And that's the quickest way to activate your calming center. It's called the parasympathetic nervous system. If we can teach that to people in that queue in the coffee where you got upset and they got upset, if someone just went, guess what? You've got a choice then, going back to that quote by Viktor Frankl, you've got the choice to choose your response to that situation and go, it's not worth it. Why am I getting upset over that? But we need to create the space. And that's where neuroscience teaches us the space, going back to your amygdala and you're flipping the lid. Neuroscience gives you that space because you have this understanding, even at a fundamental level. Oh, that was what my brain just did. Oh, why am I getting upset over that? That's not important, It's just not important. And that's that choice. When you get to make the choice, you can decide what you're going to do. And ultimately, your fight, flight, and freeze reflex will still look after you if you're getting chased by a tiger or a wolf or a bear, or, something really bad's happening, because that's built into your DNA. No matter what you choose, you're going to do that regardless.
And if we were thinking what you're teaching there is going to happen with leaders, those leaders are then going to be better at self-regulating themselves. In the interactions they have with their followers, they're going to understand not only how they are reacting, but because they're aware of themselves, they're going to be aware of how they may react to what they're going to be saying and what they're going to be doing. So therefore, they're able to understand, okay, this person's going to get a little bit stressed, so I'm going to deliver this in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and understanding the team, or understanding the people and the message, and how do you deliver whatever message it is with the most humanistic intent. That's the thing. You can't cover everyone, you can't cover everything, but you certainly can do it a lot better than an all points email that goes out, or a Zoom call that says you've just sacked 800 people over Zoom. I think that was something we saw during COVID. What a terrible way. The tech giants, if you can't access your email, you don't have a job. What a horrible thing to do to anyone, But we can learn so much more about it. And that's where it's great that neuroscience just keeps unlocking it. Because like I said before, fMRI, the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, only came into place in 1996. We've got less than 30 years of technology looking inside our brains. But we've had all this, all this other stuff's been built over time. We're just getting the insights. The one thing that I love sharing, and I wish I'd known it in sales earlier, there's parts of your brain that light up exactly the same way if it's rejection, social pain, as physical pain. So when someone says something that you feel rejected and you go, oh, that hurts, it's because part of your brain's lighting up exactly the same as if they just stabbed you. The difference is the message you tell yourself, the pain goes away, unlike being stabbed. And that's only 2014 from memory. I think they discovered that, the link between social rejection and physical pain.
If we're thinking about the individuals in front of us as well, and we're thinking about how their brain is working, I guess we also then need to be aware that what's happening in their lives outside of work can impact on what's happening in work. Is what they bring with them every day, what they take away with them every day. They sort of interlink. If someone's having something negative happen at work, they're going to take that negativity home. It's going to impact their life. That can then make that situation worse, which then they bring into work.
Yes.
People can end up in these spirals going down. They could, equally spiral up. And I guess one of the things we need to be aware of in the way that we're now working, particularly when it's a virtual world, is someone's commute could literally be from one room to the next room. And they haven't had time to deal with whatever's happened at work, or they haven't had time to deal with whatever argument they may have had in the morning, bringing it into work. So there isn't that defrag time. That's what I like to call it, defrag time. Shows my age, I guess. So what advice would you give someone? Let's not even say it's now a leader impact. What advice would you give someone who is in that situation where their commute is through a doorway and that's it? How could they try and make sure that they're dealing with whatever it might be from a neuroscience perspective? How could they deal with it?
So we talk about loud leaving. So loud leaving is you have a ritual that separates the two. So in my case, I normally have a pair of Doc Martens slip-ons. They're not 12 eyes, so I don't have to lace them up, but a pair of Doc Marten boots and socks on that I sit at my desk when I'm at home. And when I finish, it's a process of taking my shoes off. I'll call out to my wife and my kids, hey, I'm on my way home. I'll see you soon. So that loud leaving creates a separation. Some people will go for a walk. They'll come out of their home office and they go straight for a walk. I've got a dog. I can go and take the dog for a walk. And then you sit down, and that's where you need to create that separation. What we witnessed was a lot of people who didn't turn their laptop off. You still got to have permission to turn your laptop off. Just because you're working from home, you don't need it on all the time. And that's where that creating that separation is really important, and creating a routine that ultimately we are more than the work we do. And knowing that you have to set the boundary, you have to create the boundary. And that's, some people, it's still a struggle for them to create the boundary. Ultimately, we need to be empowered enough to set it and say, that's it, I'm not going to do it. Because then that goes into a whole pile of other reasons of why you're a workaholic. But Chris, that's a whole nother episode of driven for attention or driven for success, and why people do that, and what causes that. Because that's what leads to burnout ultimately.
Yeah.
So all of this is about, if a company realized how much it costs them in lost productivity through burnout, they would just change what they're doing. Burnout you don't often see until it actually is the final moment. They're oblivious to the damage being done or the cost to their productivity. It's just really hard to measure.
I think as well within that is, we as society are still so unaware of just how good people are at masking whatever it might be that's going on the inside.
Yes. So the one quote, it always resonated with me of what was wrong, and its origin is quite amazing, but there was the quote, "It's not personal, it's business." And that became this touchstone of corporate America. It's nothing personal, it's purely business. Well, that quote came from the movie The Godfather, when they were talking about killing a policeman in the movie. And it's like, how did that become popular culture? And how did that become a business maxim? Why were people saying that? I've heard people say it to me. No, this is business. It's nothing personal. Everything we do is personal. We're human beings. We lost our way. And I think the pandemic was a great realignment for a lot of people to go, well, actually, we're so much more than the work we do.
And I guess as well, we have to appreciate the increase in the workforce of anxiety, stress, depression, and how it's an interplay between what's happening at work, what's happening at home, like we've just talked about there.
Yeah, and that's because we are having the language about it. I mean, 10 years ago, people wouldn't have talked about it. Maybe 20 years ago, certainly. So now it's becoming, well, we're going to talk about it, and we're actually going to start having these conversations. The phrase psychological safety, Amy Edmondson coined it some years back, but it didn't get discussed till just before the pandemic. It was only new then. So we're only talking about an understanding of team performance in the last 3 or 4 years. That's not business popular culture yet. That's still got a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. And mental health awareness and things like that, a lot of places are still seeing it as a tick box exercise. It's, all I need to do is put a poster on the wall and just say, if you need this, call this number.
Yes.
And in reality, there's a whole load of investment that needs to go in for people, particularly leaders, because they have the influence and the power to impact everyone in the organization. They need an understanding of really what's going on, of what role do they have. Because for me, a leader needs to know more about the individual than just how do they turn up at work. They need to have that curiosity about how things going at home, big events. Like you said about the name recognition. Imagine on a Monday morning, if your leader turned around and said, oh, it was your daughter's birthday the weekend. How did that go?
Yes.
That's a whole level of security and safety that person now feels. They feel recognized at work. They will come forward to you and say if there's something going on.
Yeah, and that's why we constantly talk about psychological safety, creating vulnerability, that you can have those real conversations. So there's a lot of great programs and charities that are all now about mental health, because we've got to remove the stigma. Like, I'm the son of a bricklayer. They never talked about their feelings, yet they're one of the highest at risk of suicide. Men aged between 44 and 54 in Australia, that's the highest demographic of suicide, because they're the generation, and my generation, who weren't prepared to talk about their feelings. So we've got to change it because it's costing lives. And this is what we're seeing now. So business will evolve because society is saying we need to talk about this stuff. We can't suppress it and push it down because it's killing people, And that's why it's important to have the language around it and what to do and what to say. That's modern leadership. That's the thing. You have to have the language.
Yeah.
You can no longer just sit in a boardroom and ignore it. That's the pushback to COVID. Yeah.
Mm. Like you said about the leader that caused you to leave your job, you can't just walk past everyone and just end up in an office,
Yes.
because there is something, I guess, so fundamental there of you're not acknowledging the people, you're ignoring the people, but what effect does that have on the people? There's no meaning to their life anymore because you said that people are crying out for attention from that person and that person's not giving it to them. That is such a negative way to start your day.
And that would happen in a lot of workplaces. That's the reality. And that's just poor business models, which are changing. They have to, because the older models have evolved and they're no longer relevant to what's happening now, because the next generation of workers will not stand for it. There is some pushback saying, the younger generation. Well, no, actually, no, the younger generation have just got better language about it and they won't cop your bullshit. They'll push back and say, no, I'm not going to do that because that's outside what I believe is right. Good on them, because that's ultimately empowerment. We've empowered them. So why aren't we listening to them? The worst thing a business can say, well, this is how we do it here, or in my day. Well, that's not going to wash. You can't do that anymore. The world is too interconnected now for that to succeed as a business model.
And I guess as well, there's other things such as the way offices are designed that's going to have to change. Because think about like the corner office, the whole idea of a corner office. You're separating yourself from your team. You have a door that you can close to them and you can just hide away there the whole time and then leave. Well, that's not the way the world works anymore. If you're a real leader, you need to be in and amongst the people. You need to be talking to the people. You need to be there.
Correct. Look, and the most empowering thing would be for a leader to walk into the factory and go and talk to a couple of the people in there and just ask them about their lives. Get to know one person and their family, and imagine the power of that. Like that worker would never leave your company. If you walked into the factory floor and got to know him on a one-on-one basis and asked him, what's his wife's name? What's his kid's name? Like, just that validation. That worker who's never seen, that'd be a wonderful thing. And it's free to do, Chris. And it's so easy. You just allocate a little bit of your precious time as a leader to actually get to know another human being. The greatest thing that I always talk about is that people who work in frontline anything, retail, services, whatever they happen to work in, they don't wear a name badge because they've forgotten their name.
Yeah.
They wear a name badge so you can use their name to say hello to them. Who doesn't want to hear their name back at them? So that's my challenge to all your listeners. Whenever they go into anywhere, coffee shop, whatever store they happen to be in, and someone's wearing a name badge, say good morning or hello or good night, good evening, whatever, and use their name. If the barista asks you, and what's your name to put on the coffee cup, ask them what their name is. I guarantee you, they're just not used to it. So let's start calling people by their name. That's what it's there for.
It's the power of the name.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's one of those things as well. Like we talk about like diversity in the workplace. And one of the things is names. And there is the reality that we have a multicultural society now and people from different backgrounds. And I guess one of the most fundamental things that people can do to increase diversity is to make sure that they A, learn someone's name, and B, learn how to pronounce it correctly.
Yes. And ask them how to do it. How do I spell your name and how do I say it the right way? That's all.
And just turn around and say, if I say it wrong in the next couple of days, feel free to just correct me because I want to get it right, because that shows willing.
Yes. So if we talk about leadership though, and this is the one thing, how diverse are C-suite leadership teams? Majority of males, white males in their mid-40s to mid-50s, if not older. That's what we need to change. That's it. We need more females leading boards and we need more diversity because that's the real world. Change that, you'll change workplaces.
Yeah. And it's diversity in almost every measure.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
As a final parting question, because I think we've done fantastic going through so many different topics and we've gone really into the neuro sort of science behind things and how we deal with the brains. And I think our leaders will have a lot to take away from that. But my final parting question, which I ask everyone, is if you were to think of one lesson or one bit of advice that you can give a leader starting out today, what would it be?
Thinking about my children, it's to be the senior you needed when you were in junior, right? So to be that elder or that mentor that you desperately wanted when you were younger. That is your role. I ascribe by the message that I'm just here to plant trees under whose shade I'll never sit. Be that mentor for someone else that you desperately wished you had when you were younger. Just remember what it was like when you started. You didn't have all the answers. You were hoping that you got that promotion. You were hoping that you got that job, whatever it was. Remember what that felt like? Because I can guarantee a lot of them have forgotten. Yeah.
I like that, the planting trees under which you're never going to sit idea. That's almost hinting at that legacy. You're going to create something that you're never going to reap the rewards of.
Correct.
But the fact that you created it, that's the legacy you're leaving.
Yeah. That's an old Greek proverb. But Ricky Gervais did use it in, was it The Good Life? Anyway, there's a great scene, him and there's a lady, they're sitting under a tree at the cemetery talking about life. And she says, a society grows great when old men plant trees under whose shade they'll never sit. That's legacy.
Yeah, that's having a lasting impact on the world and a positive impact on the world as well.
Yeah, that's it. You can't take it with you when you're gone, Chris. It doesn't fit in the hearse and it doesn't fit in the coffin. So, you know, what are they going to say about you? That's your lasting legacy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for all the lessons and the advice and the information that you've given to all of our leaders that are listening. I'm sure they will now be following you on LinkedIn after that. So you're going to have many followers now. Thank you so much for coming on.
Wonderful. My pleasure, Chris.
Thank you. And until next time, remember, to lead requires us to continuously learn.